The origins of the Nazgûl. Sauron gave 9 rings of power to mortal men sometime after the year 1697 of the Second Age. This was after his conquest of a region and the death of Celebrimbor, the elven smith who had helped forge the rings. The 9 chosen men were already powerful: kings, sorcerers, and warriors. Among them were at least 3 lords of Númenor, likely from the faction known as the King's Men, who had long fallen under Sauron's influence. One by name we know as Camul, an Easterling. At first, the rings brought them wealth, extended life, and authority, but gradually, the rings consumed them. They began to perceive the unseen world, which ordinary mortals cannot experience. Their physical forms weakened and eventually disappeared, leaving behind wraiths that existed primarily in the shadow world. Bound to Sauron through the One Ring, they lost all independence and became the Nazgûl, his most feared servants. They first appeared publicly in the year 2251 in the Second Age, already enslaved to their master's will. Unlike ordinary mortals, their forms were invisible, seen only through the black cloaks and armor they wore. From this point on, their existence was tied entirely to Sauron and his power, and they became instruments of his will across Middle-earth. The Nazgûl in the Second and early Third Age. After their first appearance in 2251 of the Second Age, little is recorded of the Ringwraiths during the remainder of that age. When Sauron was defeated in 3441 by the last alliance of elves and men, the Nazgûl too faded into hiding, as their existence depended on their master's strength. For nearly 1,000 years, they vanished from history. They re-emerged after Sauron began to return in the Third Age. Around the year 1050, Sauron took the form of a dark presence in Greenwood the Great, which later became known as Mirkwood. By 1100, the wise, being the wizards and the Eldar, suspected this presence might be one of the Nazgûl. In truth, it was Sauron himself, but the reawakening of his power also brought back the wraiths. In 1300, the chief of the Nazgûl, later called the Witch King, founded the kingdom of Angmar in the far north. From there, he waged centuries of war against the northern Dúnedain kingdom of Arnor. Gathering orcs and evil men to his side, he became the dominant threat to the northern realms for over 600 years. During this time, Gondor suffered its own hardships from wars and plague, which weakened its watch on Mordor and allowed the Nazgûl to slip back into their master's old land. By 1856 in the Third Age, the wraiths had freely re-entered Mordor. The Witch King was eventually defeated in the north in 1975 through the combined forces of Gondor and the elves of Lindon and Rivendell. He disappeared from Angmar, only to re-emerge in Mordor 5 years later. There, he gathered the other Nazgûl, preparing for Sauron's eventual return to power. The capture of Minas Ithil. In the year 2000 of the Third Age, the Nazgûl made their first major conquest as a group. They seized the pass of Cirith Ungol and laid siege to the Gondorian city of Minas Ithil. After 2 years, in 2002, the city fell to them. Once captured, Minas Ithil became their chief stronghold and was renamed Minas Morgul, the Tower of Dark Sorcery. From this base, they not only strengthened Mordor's armies, but also spread terror into the surrounding lands, causing many Gondorians to abandon Ithilien. The capture also gave them control of one of the 7 Palantiri, seeing stones that allowed communication and vision over vast distances. This particular Palantir was later used by Sauron himself to manipulate Denethor II, the steward of Gondor, centuries afterward. Minas Morgul remained the Nazgûl's fortress for the rest of the Third Age, a constant symbol of their domination over the lands west of Mordor. The challenge of King Eärnur. After Gondor's King Eärnur II died in 2043, his son Eärnur took the throne. Years earlier, during Gondor's aid to the north, Eärnur had faced the Witch King in battle. His horse, terrified by the wraith's presence, bolted and carried him from the fight. The Witch King mocked him publicly, and though Gondor was ultimately victorious with elven aid, Eärnur carried this humiliation for the rest of his life. When he became king, the Witch King, now ruling from Minas Morgul, sent a formal challenge to single combat, taunting Eärnur about his past disgrace. Gondor's steward, Mardil Voronwe, persuaded the king not to accept. However, in 2050, the challenge was renewed, and this time, Eärnur could not be restrained. He rode out with a small company to Minas Morgul, and none of them were ever seen again. Before leaving, Eärnur placed his crown on the lap of his father's statue in the Houses of the Dead. It remained there for almost 1,000 years until it was later used at the coronation of King Elisar. With Eärnur's disappearance, Gondor's line of kings ended, and the stewards ruled in their stead. This victory cemented the Witch King's reputation as Gondor's greatest nemesis during that age. The Watchful Peace and Sauron's return. From 2063 to 2460 in the Third Age, there was a long period known as the Watchful Peace. During this time, Sauron withdrew into the east, concealing his presence and rebuilding his strength. The Nazgûl likewise remained hidden within the Vale of Morgul, exerting little open activity. This quiet ended after Sauron was driven from Dol Guldur by the White Council in 2091. By 2942, he returned to Mordor and openly declared himself again in 2951. At this point, he reorganized his servants, and 3 of the Nazgûl were sent back to Dol Guldur to serve as captains of that fortress. The most important of these was Khamûl the Easterling, the second in command of the 9, who was placed in charge of Dol Guldur itself. This redeployment marked the beginning of the Nazgûl's final campaigns. With Sauron restored to open power, their role shifted from hiding and waiting to direct preparation for war and the recovery of the One Ring. By the late Third Age, Gollum had revealed to Sauron that the One Ring was in the possession of a Baggins from the Shire. This intelligence shifted the Nazgûl's mission entirely. In 3017, Sauron set the 9 to the task of finding the Ring-bearer. Their search began subtly, but secrecy soon gave way to open action. On June 20, 3018, Sauron launched a large-scale attack on Osgiliath. This battle had 2 purposes. First, to test the defenses of Gondor, and second, to provide cover for the mobilization of all 9 Ringwraiths so that their sudden appearance would not betray their true mission. At the same time, Sauron ordered assaults on the woodland realm of Thranduil, hoping to recapture Gollum. The Witch King, leading 6 of the 9 from Minas Morgul, crossed the Anduin in stealth. They traveled through Anorion and the Wold before receiving mounts and black cloaks around July 17th. Soon after, they met Khamûl and another Nazgûl from Dol Guldur at the Field of Celebrant. From Khamûl, they learned that Gollum had escaped both the elves and the orcs, and that no halflings lived in the Vales of Anduin. Despite this failure, the Witch King pressed northward, searching vainly for the Shire. By September, Sauron ordered the 9 to abandon secrecy and ride openly. On September 18th, they crossed the fords of Isen and arrived at Isengard, confronting Saruman. When Saruman evaded them, chance delivered Grima Wormtongue into their path, and from him they learned the location of the Shire. Splitting into groups, the Witch King pressed ahead, driving away the Rangers at Sarn Ford on September 22nd and opening the way into the Shire itself. The Black Riders in the Shire and Eriador. On September 23rd, 3018, Khamûl and 3 other Nazgûl entered the Shire. Khamûl questioned the Gaffer about Baggins, only to find Frodo had already departed that morning. Over the following days, the Ringwraiths pursued the hobbits across the Shire. They were sighted near Woody End, driven away once by the company of Gildor and Glorian's elves, and later appeared at Farmer Maggot's farm, demanding news of Baggins. Meanwhile, other Nazgûl moved into Breeland. On September 26th, 2 came to the Prancing Pony, but they were turned away by the inn's servants. Over the next days, they coordinated with informants like Bill Ferny and other spies, learning more about the hobbits' strange movements. On September 28th, the hobbits were captured by a Barrow-wight, one of the spirits originally sent into the Barrow Downs by the Witch King centuries earlier, but they were freed by Tom Bombadil. By September 30th, the Nazgûl intensified their actions. While agents likely carried out the break-in at the Prancing Pony, the Wraiths themselves attacked Crick Hollow, Frodo's decoy residence, in an attempt to seize him. At the same time, others scouted and spread terror through Bree and the surrounding countryside. The pursuit drove Frodo and his companions eastward under Aragorn's protection, leading to their fateful encounter with the Ringwraiths at Weathertop. The attack at Weathertop. On October 3rd, 3018, Gandalf reached Weathertop and was attacked by all 9 Ringwraiths. The battle was fierce, with flashes of light seen as far as the Midgewater marshes by Aragorn and the hobbits. Gandalf fought them off and escaped, but the Nazgûl pressed their pursuit, splitting forces to cover more ground. 2 days later, on October 5th, Aragorn and the hobbits themselves reached Weathertop. There they were attacked by 5 of the Nazgûl, led by the Witch King. During the fight, Frodo succumbed to the ring's temptation and put it on, allowing the Wraiths to see him fully in the unseen world. The Witch King struck him with a Morgul blade. This weapon had the power to turn its victim into a Wraith permanently, binding them to the unseen realm. Though Aragorn drove the Nazgûl back with fire, the wound left Frodo gravely afflicted and vulnerable to the Shadow World. The Witch King believed his mission had succeeded, since Frodo was mortally wounded and doomed to fade. With this, the Ringwraiths temporarily withdrew, confident the Ring-bearer was already lost. Their plan, however, underestimated the healing power still present in Rivendell. The flight to the ford of Bruinen. After the attack at Weathertop, the Nazgûl spread out to intercept Aragorn's company. Khamûl and 3 riders attempted to block them at the last bridge, but were driven off on October 11th by Glorfindel of Rivendell. The Elf Lord's presence was critical. His power in both the seen and unseen worlds made him one of the few beings able to stand openly against the Wraiths. On October 18th, Glorfindel found Aragorn's party and joined their flight to Rivendell. Frodo, deeply weakened by the Morgul wound, began to perceive Glorfindel in his true form, shining with the light of Valinor. This terrified the Nazgûl, who still pursued closely. The Witch King led them in the final chase as they drove Frodo toward the ford of Brunnen. At the ford, Frodo resisted their command to yield the ring. The Wraiths advanced, but Elrond, master of Rivendell, unleashed the river in a sudden flood. The waters rose in great waves, sweeping the Nazgûl and their horses away. Their mounts destroyed, their mission failed. The Nine retreated in defeat. By December 3018, the Witch King returned alone to Mordor, sending aid to recover his companions. They regrouped in Minas Morgul to prepare for Sauron's coming war against Gondor. The War of the Ring and the Fall of the Witch King. By early 3019, the Nazgûl were equipped with new flying mounts, fell beasts that allowed them to strike over long distances. They patrolled the skies of Rohan, Ithilien, and Mordor, spreading dread wherever they passed. On March 1st to 4th, Frodo and Sam saw one of them while crossing the Dead Marshes, and on March 5th, Gandalf's company returning from Isengard was overshadowed by another. These appearances signaled the Nazgûl's growing presence as war drew near. On March 10th, the Witch King led Sauron's armies out of Minas Morgul in full strength. As he passed through Ithilien, he sensed the ring-bearer nearby, but continued his march toward Minas Tirith. On March 12th, Osgiliath fell to his forces, and by March 14th, the city of Minas Tirith was under full siege. At midnight, the Witch King brought forward Grond, the great battering ram, and broke through the city's main gate. He rode into the city unchallenged save by Gandalf, but before their clash could occur, the horns of Rohan announced the arrival of Theoden's host. The battle on the Pelennor fields raged through the night and into the morning of March 15th. The Witch King descended upon Theoden, striking down his horse and mortally wounding the king. As he prepared to finish his prey, a warrior named Dernhelm stood against him. When the Witch King declared that no living man could hinder him, Dernhelm cast off her disguise, revealing herself as Éowyn, a woman of Rohan. Aided by Merry, who struck with a barrow blade forged with spells against Angmar, Éowyn dealt the final blow, destroying the Witch King's form and ending his power forever. His death was followed swiftly by the rout of Sauron's armies on the field. Éowyn, Merry, and Faramir all suffered under the Black Breath, the poisonous aura of the Nazgûl, but they were later healed by Aragorn using Athelas. The Witch King's fall fulfilled the prophecy long foretold by Glorfindel that he would not be slain by the hand of man. The final defeat of the Nazgûl. After the fall of the Witch King, the 8 remaining Ringwraiths continued to serve Sauron. On March 18th, 3019, Aragorn led the host of the West from Minas Tirith toward the Black Gate. Beginning on March 22nd, the Nazgûl flew overhead on their fell beasts, observing and reporting the army's movements. Their presence remained constant, casting fear over the company, though they did not engage. During the Battle of the Morannon on March 25th, the Nazgûl descended to attack the army of the West directly. The great eagles of the north, led by Gwaihir and Landroval, rose to challenge them in the skies. Yet the conflict in the air ended abruptly, not because of the eagles, but because Frodo, at that very moment in Mount Doom, claimed the One Ring for himself. Sauron instantly perceived this and summoned the Nazgûl to Orodruin with all haste. The ring, however, was destroyed before they could arrive. As Gollum fell with it into the fires of Mount Doom, the foundations of Sauron's power collapsed. The Nazgûl, whose existence was entirely bound to the will of the One Ring, were caught in the eruption of the mountain. Their fell beasts and wraith forms were consumed in the firestorm, annihilating them forever. The Nazgûl ceased to exist with the downfall of Sauron. Their stronghold, Minas Morgul, remained abandoned, a place of dread, until long after the war. Under King Elisar, the city was eventually restored as Minas Ithil, erasing the last stain of their presence from Gondor.